Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The golden frame on Chidinma's office desk held a photo of Obinna smiling with their newborn son in his arms. It was taken hours after the boy's birth. His eyes were closed, lips trembling, too small to understand the weight of the name he carried. Now 15 years later, that same child was taller than her shoulder, spoke with confidence, and walked like he carried the world in his chest. Obinna Jr. was handsome, brilliant, and deeply admired by the public. His father's legacy lived not just in his name, but in the boldness of his character. But lately, Chadinma felt something shifting. His gaze held an edge she couldn't place. His words were sharper. His absence from the company grew frequent. What used to be morning hugs and prayers before school had turned into cold nods, and doors closed behind him. It wasn't puberty. It wasn't independence. It was something deeper, and she could feel it pulling him away, like smoke slipping through her fingers. Unknown to her, eyes were watching from afar. Chief Yuzo, Obinna's elder brother, had spent the last decade biding his time, licking his wounds after losing the estate war to Chidinma, pretending to move on. But Yuzo was never the type to lose quietly. He had watched Chadinma build Obinna Holdings into a national success, watched the media praise her for her elegance and strategic brilliance. Every headline burned through his ego like acid. But it wasn't Chadinma he focused on now. It was her son. The boy had grown into everything the Obinna name needed, a symbol, a new face, an emotional hook. The boy is the key, Yuzo muttered one evening, as he stared at a printed photo of Obinna Jr. from a tech summit. Take the boy, you take the throne. And so he began the next phase of his plan, to win the boy's heart, feed him lies, and crown him with a fire meant to consume his own mother. The first step was subtle. Mama Obinna, who had stayed largely silent in the years since Yuzo's arrest and temporary release on bond, was sent to visit her grandson. "I miss my boy," she told Chadinma with a faint smile. "Can I take him to lunch? Just us." Against her instincts, Chidinma agreed. She believed in healing. She believed Obinna Jr. needed to know his family without bitterness. That lunch was the first of many visits. Over meals and strolls, Mama Obinna began to whisper, "You know, your mother didn't always want you to inherit your father's name. You were a baby then, but your uncle fought for you." Obinna Jr., curious and eager to understand his father's legacy, began to listen. And like a match struck in the shadows, the fire of doubt was lit, and Yuzo was ready with the fuel. The second phase of Yuzo's plan began in a private lounge at a 5-star hotel on Victoria Island. It was designed to impress, but not overwhelm. The room smelled of cedar and money, old money. Yuzo sat with Obinna Jr. on a leather couch, both sipping fruit drinks, as if this were just another family bonding moment. "Your father sat on this very seat the night he signed his first oil contract," Yuzo lied smoothly, tapping the armrest. "I was with him. Your mother, she wasn't there." The boy raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Why not?" Yuzo smiled gently. "Let's just say she didn't believe in us the way we believed in her." Obinna Jr. didn't respond immediately. But Yuzo could see it. The seed was taking root. "You know what hurts me?" Yuzo added, voice lowering. "She's never invited you to a board meeting. Not once. But this company bears your name." Back at home, Chadinma was unaware of these meetings. Obinna Jr. told her he was attending a youth entrepreneurship workshop organized by an NGO. She trusted him, wanted to, at least. But when he returned home late for the third night in a row, the look in his eyes wasn't exhaustion. It was agitation. "Where were you?" she asked gently. "With mentors," he snapped. "You wouldn't understand. You're too busy polishing your image." The words stung. He had never spoken to her that way before. She blinked, swallowing her pain. "I just want to know what's happening in your world." He laughed dryly. "Maybe if you trusted me with some responsibility in the company, I'd tell you." The walls between them thickened. Meanwhile, Yuzo poured more poison. "They'll never let you lead," he told the boy. "Because if you rise, they lose control." The final trap was money. Yuzo gave Obinna Jr. access to a digital account linked to an educational investment startup. But it wasn't real. The boy began transferring funds from his personal allowance into fake projects created by Yuzo's shell companies. This is how power works, Yuzo told him. You invest early, they follow you later. Obinna Jr. felt exhilarated. He began dressing sharper, hanging out with older crowds. Yuzo gave him a fake title, honorary partner in a non-existent firm, and introduced him to a circle of reckless, privileged youths who drank too much, drove too fast, and lived like the world owed them something. Obinna Jr., thirsty for his father's legacy and blinded by rebellion, began slipping deeper. And with every step, he walked further away from the mother who once carried him through fire. The boardroom was quiet, the AC humming softly. Chidinma sat alone, reviewing projections on her tablet. Her fingers hovered over a column of declining youth engagement figures. Something didn't feel right. She leaned back, rubbing her forehead. The company was performing well, but there were ripples she couldn't explain. Key staff were distracted, younger employees seemed less motivated, and one intern had reportedly been bribed into leaking early-stage proposals. "We're missing something," she whispered. But before she could piece it together, her phone buzzed. A news alert. Her eyes widened. Obinna Jr. joins Abadike Praxis Initiative as co-founder. The article included a picture of her son in a suit, shaking hands with Yuzo in front of a modern office building. The company name didn't exist in any of her registers. Her heart dropped. She called him. He didn't pick. She tried again. Nothing. By evening, he returned home, eyes glowing with pride. "Did you see the article?" he said before she could ask. "They finally see what I can do." Chadinma sat down, expression unreadable. "That man is not your mentor," she said. "He's a threat to everything your father built." Obinna Jr. laughed. "You mean everything you took after pushing everyone else out?" Her lips trembled. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" he snapped. "He showed me records, papers where you blocked me from attending strategy meetings. You froze my access to Abadike reports. You've been keeping me in a corner." Chidinma shook her head slowly. "You were 15, Obinna. I was protecting you from this chaos. From them." But he was already walking away. The lie had taken root. And for now he believed it. Yuzo watched from the shadows, content. His greatest weapon had turned against her. Now, all he had to do was let time unravel Chadinma's crown thread by thread. The boy she once carried through betrayal, poverty, and war now carried her undoing inside him. And the saddest part? She had no idea how far the fall would go. Not yet. The atmosphere in the house began to change like air before a storm, tense, unpredictable, electric, with something unspoken. Chidinma walked through the corridors of her home, pausing by Obinna Jr.'s door more often than she used to. She listened not for sounds of rebellion, but for signs of the little boy she once knew, the child who'd press his tiny palm against her cheek and whisper, "Mummy, don't cry." But that child seemed to have vanished, replaced by a teenage version armored in pride, coated in anger, and drunk on false empowerment. She tried to talk to him one night after dinner, waiting until he was calm and scrolling through his phone. "Can we talk?" she asked gently. He didn't look up. "I'm busy." Her heart dropped. "Just 5 minutes." He turned his head slowly. "You've had 15 years. You just didn't listen." Then he stood up and left her sitting alone at the table, the untouched plate of food between them still steaming. Chadinma spent sleepless nights revisiting every decision she'd made since he was born. Had she been too strict? Too protective? Had she focused too much on preserving Obinna's legacy and not enough on preparing Obinna Jr. to carry it? Her questions haunted her. She tried reaching out to Emeka, the family lawyer and longtime friend, but even he sensed her hesitation. "If he's being influenced by Yuzo," Emeka said one afternoon, "he's not just being taught lies, he's being taught how to mask them." Chadinma's eyes welled up. "What if I lose him, Emeka? What if I already have?" Emeka placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't lose him. They hijacked him. And boys hijacked by false power don't return through force. They return through pain or truth." That night, she sat outside on the porch with Obinna's journal in her lap, flipping through pages her son had never seen. Maybe it was time. Meanwhile, Obinna Jr. was thriving in all the wrong ways. He had become a symbol of rising youth power, featured in magazines as the young heir reinventing legacy. He began skipping school, buying designer clothes, attending high-end parties sponsored by Yuzo shell companies. Yuzo gave him a black Range Rover for leadership image, and the boy started driving through town like a prince in exile. To the world, it looked like succession. But to Chidinma, it looked like a funeral in slow motion. The worst part wasn't his behavior, it was his tone. He no longer spoke with concern or curiosity. His voice was dismissive, sarcastic, and in moments, cruel. "You're not my only parent, you know," he told her during one argument. "You just happened to survive longer than Dad." She locked herself in the bathroom afterward and wept into a towel, muffling the sound so he wouldn't hear. It felt like losing her husband all over again, but this time, through the eyes of the child they once dreamed for. Yuzo intensified his psychological warfare under the polished veil of mentorship. He began registering Obinna Jr. as a co-signatory on hollow ventures, businesses that existed only on paper but were used to launder influence and manipulate the media narrative. Obinna Jr. was too young to see the trap. He believed he was being positioned for greatness, that his name on company documents meant he was finally leading the empire his mother had hidden from him. Yuzo clapped him on the back in meetings and said things like, "Your father would be proud," while behind closed doors he crafted contracts that transferred soft ownership of minor assets under Obinna Jr.'s name, just enough to give the illusion of power, but not enough to hold any real control. "Let him feel like a king," Yuzo told his secretary. "So when I take the throne, he'll thank me for saving him from his own mother." Behind every so-called investment deal was a ticking bomb. One of Yuzo's most dangerous moves was introducing Obinna Jr. to nightlife and adult gatherings where politicians, thugs, and influencers merged in a twisted cocktail of influence and moral decay. The boy became addicted, not just to the thrill, but to the illusion of being untouchable. He walked into places and heads turned. Women whispered. Cameras flashed. And all the while, Yuzo fed him more alcohol, more validation, more fabricated stories about how Chadinma was plotting to hand the company over to outsiders. "She doesn't believe in you," he told him during a midnight car ride. "She believes in her version of you, the one she controls, not the man you are becoming." The boy swallowed the lie whole, forgetting the woman who once shielded him from the very storms he was now running into. Chidinma received anonymous messages, news links, and blurry photos from well-meaning staff and partners who noticed the shift. The Obinna Holdings board began asking questions she couldn't answer without implicating her own son. Rumors spread that Obinna Jr. would be taking over soon. Headlines like "Obinna Jr. steps out from mother's shadow" began to trend. She stood in her office one morning staring at her own portrait on the wall. The image of power, elegance, and intelligence felt like a costume now. Inside, she was terrified. She didn't know how to fight this kind of war, where the enemy wasn't outside the house, but already sleeping under her roof. And worse, he looked exactly like the man she once loved. It was a Monday morning when Chadinma's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Missed calls, texts, news alerts. Her staff looked at her with nervous eyes as she stepped into the elevator. Something had happened. She finally opened her phone and saw the video. Obinna Jr. shirtless, drunk, and in a violent fistfight with a fellow teenager outside an elite nightclub in Lekki. The video was shaky but unmistakable. He shouted insults, blood on his shirt, and slurred threats about being the future of Obinna Holdings. The media wasted no time. Within an hour, the hashtags trended. Hashtag Obinna shame, hashtag where is his mother, hashtag legacy in ruin. The name she had fought for, bled for, suffered for, now twisted into a headline used to mock her integrity. She stared at the screen in silence, unable to breathe. Her staff gathered in the boardroom. No one spoke until she arrived. Emeka, who had seen the video, gently placed a newspaper on the table. The headline read, "This is what happens when a woman thinks she can raise a man alone." Chadinma's hands trembled. Her voice cracked as she said, "I failed him." The room remained still. "We must begin damage control," Emika offered, but her eyes were distant. She excused herself and walked to the restroom, locking the door behind her. And for the first time in over a decade, she sank to the floor and wept, not for the company, not even for her reputation, but for the little boy who used to rest his head on her chest, and for the mother who had believed that love alone was enough to protect him from wolves. Across town, Yuzo smiled as he sipped champagne. "Now she knows what it means to watch your own legacy crumble," he whispered. But he had miscalculated something. Chidinma wasn't just broken. She was awakening. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was the pause before thunder. And her next move would not be about salvaging image. It would be about reclaiming her son. Not through force, but through a truth even Yuzo could never control. Obinna Jr. stood by the balcony of the penthouse Yuzo had rented for him, arms crossed and mind burning with confusion. The video scandal had changed everything. Though Yuzo assured him it would blow over, the backlash was fierce, and even some of the fake friends he had made began to distance themselves. That morning, Yuzo came over with Mama Abadike. The two elders sat him down with wide smiles and a box full of old photos, ones they had deliberately hidden for this very moment. They painted his mother as a gold digger, a manipulator who only had a child to secure inheritance. Mama Abadike leaned close and whispered, "Your father never truly chose her. She forced herself into our lives. We only tolerated her for peace." Yuzo nodded and added, "She's holding the company in your name, boy. But she has no plans to hand it over." The boy's throat dried up as the seed of doubt cracked open fully in his chest. By nightfall, Obinna Jr. had begun rehearsing his confrontation. Fueled by pride, betrayal, and a teenage desire to claim what he believed was his, he stomped through the halls of Abadike Holdings with new arrogance. When staff greeted him, he didn't reply. He no longer felt like a visitor. He felt like the hidden king reclaiming his throne. Meanwhile, Chadinma was upstairs finalizing quarterly numbers for a strategic meeting when a secretary burst in, trembling. "Ma, your son he's downstairs with security." Her hands froze over the keyboard. Before she could descend, the sound of his voice echoed through the glass doors as he marched in shouting, "This is MY Company. I'm tired of being sidelined. You've had your turn." She arrived in time to see him push the boardroom door open with reporters already trailing behind. The board members froze in a stunned silence. Obinna Jr., dressed in a blazer and jeans, face tight with resentment, pointed a trembling finger at Chidinma. "I'm the heir to Abadike Holdings," he declared. "And from today, I take my rightful seat." Chidinma stood slowly, refusing to let her emotion betray her. Her voice was calm, controlled, but her soul was trembling. "This is not the way, Obinna. Not with cameras. Not with lies." He laughed bitterly. "Everything I've done, every mistake, was because you never trusted me. You made me a shadow of Dad's name and locked me out." The board members murmured among themselves, confused and alarmed. Chidinma looked into her son's eyes and saw not a leader, but a lost boy who couldn't hear her anymore. "You are your father's son," she whispered. "But this isn't how he wanted you to lead." As the board members watched the public meltdown unfold, some pulled out their phones, while others whispered about intervention. Emika stood at the far end of the room, arms folded, his eyes bouncing between mother and son. "This is dangerous," one of the directors muttered. "Is he even legally authorized to speak on behalf of the board?" Another added, "If this goes viral, investors will panic." But Obinna Jr. was deaf to their murmurs. The image of his father, twisted and poisoned by Yuzo's manipulations, danced in his mind. "You hid everything from me," he roared. "I don't even have access to the foundational records. You say you're protecting the company. But from who?" "From me." Chidinma stepped forward, her eyes glassy but her posture firm. "From the wolves that surround you. From people who are using you to destroy the very thing your father built." The tension reached a breaking point when Obinna Jr. pulled out a folder, documents Yuzo had crafted for a shell investment project. These are proof I'm already investing in my father's name, he said confidently. My name is already on contracts. Your signature isn't needed anymore. A gasp rippled through the room as Chidinma looked down at the documents. She saw the traps immediately. Falsified addresses, mismatched shares, companies with no physical presence. Her heart broke not for the fraud, but for the realization that her son truly didn't know he was being used. She looked up and said softly, Obinna, if your father were alive and he saw this, he wouldn't be proud. He would be ashamed. Not because you wanted to lead, but because you let someone else define what leadership looks like. The room fell silent. For a moment, something flickered in the boy's eyes. But pride quickly drowned it. Feeling cornered, Obinna Jr. stormed out. Cameras caught the entire confrontation. Within hours, headlines read, Son battles mother over billionaire legacy. Chaos at Obinna Holdings. Chadinma remained seated long after everyone left. Her board was divided. Her company's public image was shaken. Her son was slipping further into the hands of a man who once tried to kill her. She walked back to her office with slow steps and locked the door. From her drawer, she retrieved an envelope. A letter Obinna had left behind, marked, for my son. When he's ready. She had never opened it. She had waited, prayed, and hoped he would ask for it. Now she feared it might be the only thing left to reach him. She held it against her chest and whispered, Please, Obinna, let this bring you back. The next morning, Chidinma woke to silence. Her son's room was empty, bed untouched, clothes gone. His favorite sneakers were missing from under the bed. Panic twisted her chest as she ran through the house, calling his name. One of the maids, face pale, approached with trembling hands. He left last night, Ma, in a black SUV. He said he wouldn't be coming back. Chidinma sank into the nearest chair, eyes wide with disbelief. Her own home had become a stranger's house. She walked into Obinna Jr.'s room and stood in the center, her hands brushing over the desk, the walls, the scent he left behind. Then she saw it, a picture frame lying face down. When she picked it up, it was a childhood photo of the three of them, Obinna Jr., and her, on the day of his first school admission. Her hands shook as she held it to her heart. Elsewhere, in a luxurious penthouse funded by Yuzo's stolen wealth, Obinna Jr. began to settle into his new life of dangerous independence. He was blind to the trap being set. Yuzo made sure he felt like a king, inviting him to parties, giving him chauffeurs, connecting him with media for exclusive interviews. Obinna Jr. soaked in. But beneath the glamour was emptiness. He had silenced the voice of the one person who had protected him through every stage of his life. And though he tried not to show it, there were moments he paused, like when brushing his teeth or waking up alone, moments where a memory would slip in. Her voice, her prayers, her sacrifices. But then Yuzo would call, dragging him deeper into the illusion. Don't look back, he'd say. You're rewriting history now. Back at home, Chidinma opened Obinna's journal, flipping to a bookmark page. Her late husband's words read, If our son ever forgets who you are, remind him who I said you are. My anchor, my North Star. And if you ever fear losing him, give him the letter. She clutched the journal to her chest and let the tears flow freely. She hadn't just lost her son. She was watching history repeat. They had underestimated her once, tried to destroy her through Obinna's death. Now they were using her son to finish what they failed to do. But they had forgotten one thing. She was still alive. And her love had never lost a war. She walked to her safe, retrieved the sealed envelope and whispered, If this is all I have left, then let it be the sword that sets him free. Obinna Jr. sat in his penthouse, light from the window casting long shadows across his silk-draped floor. On the glass table in front of him lay the unopened letter from his mother, labeled in his father's familiar handwriting. He had placed it there 3 days ago, untouched. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself it was probably just more of his mother's manipulative strategy. One last way to guilt him into giving up the life he now had. But deep down, beneath all the pride and false confidence Yuzo had pumped into him, there was a gnawing restlessness. That handwriting, neat and heavy with meaning, stirred something in his chest that no car or flashy apartment could silence. He hadn't spoken to his mother in days. He hadn't even answered her last message. When your heart grows heavy, remember who you are. Yuzo had grown impatient. He noticed the boy was distracted, always glancing at the letter. At one point he asked, "Why haven't you burned that thing yet?" Obinna Jr. gave a vague shrug, but Yuzo leaned in. "That woman is trying to play you from the grave now. She wants to chain your heart back to her so she can keep controlling you. You're your father's son, not her shadow." But the more Yuzo spoke, the more hollow his words felt. Something wasn't adding up. Why was Yuzo so threatened by a letter? Why was he constantly reminding Obinna Jr. that he didn't need his mother? That night, alone in the quiet hum of the city, Obinna Jr. reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. The wax seal broke like the snapping of something long buried. He unfolded the paper. His father's words struck him like thunder. "If you're reading this, then somehow my voice still matters. I loved your mother long before the world saw her value. I saw her when she had nothing, and I built with her because I knew she was my strength. Son, you were born from patience, from prayer, and from love that withstood war. If the world turns you against her, they've already stolen your crown. Don't let them. A king who forgets where he came from will always serve a liar." Obinna Jr. read those lines over and over, his heart cracking open with guilt. His vision blurred as tears spilled freely. For the first time in months, he felt small, not in defeat, but in realization. Everything Yuzo said, every whisper of hate, every manipulation, now reeked of rot. His father had trusted Chidinma to guard his son's legacy, not because she was powerful, but because she was faithful. And he, Obinna Jr., had betrayed that trust. For days after reading the letter, Obinna Jr. wandered through the penthouse like a ghost. His phone rang, messages buzzed, but he ignored them all. Yuzo noticed the change. The boy had stopped going to the club meetings, stopped approving the media, content they fed him. The once bright, defiant heir now looked like a boy who had seen the battlefield too late. "Don't let her get to you," Yuzo snarled one evening. "She's using his memory to break your will. That's all women like her know, manipulation." But Obinna Jr. didn't respond. He simply stared out the window at the city skyline. It was beautiful, yes, but it was built on illusions. Was this what it meant to be powerful? To sacrifice your truth for applause? His father's voice echoed in his head. "You were born from love that withstood war." That night, Obinna Jr. stood in front of the mirror, studying himself for the first time in a long while. Not the suits, not the branded watches, not the fake confidence, but the eyes. He saw something familiar, something he remembered from childhood. His mother's silent resilience. That gaze that never broke, even when the world spat in her face. Yuzo had tried to convince him he was nothing but his father's name, that legacy could be bought, flashed, worn on magazine covers. But now he realized legacy was quieter. It was forged in sacrifice. His mother had slept in darkness, hawked fruits in rain, and faced betrayal, all while protecting the very name he now flaunted. And how had he repaid her? By becoming a puppet for the same people who tried to destroy her. Still, pride wouldn't let him go back. Not yet. He rehearsed apologies in his mind, but couldn't bring himself to say them. Instead, he tried a softer step. He called Emeka. "I want to talk about the board shares," he said, voice stiff. Emeka was cautious. "Which ones? The ones you signed under Yuzo's influence, or the ones your father actually left for you?" That silence again. The weight of his mistakes felt unbearable. "I just want to fix what I can," he said quietly. Emeka agreed to meet. But even as progress stirred, Yuzo sensed his grip loosening. He doubled down, introducing Obinna Jr. to a new investor, one that would lock him in even deeper. "Just sign this. You'll be a full partner in Abadike Media Holdings." Obinna took the document, but didn't sign. That was the first sign. The war had begun inside him, and the boy who once screamed in boardrooms was starting to remember his real name. Far from the city lights, in the quiet corner of a local bar, Emeka sat across from Yuzo's younger cousin, Muna, a nervous 23-year-old whose conscience had finally begun to itch. Muna had been recruited as a silent partner in several of Yuzo's shell companies, used only to sign papers and front accounts that didn't exist. "Barrister Emeka," he said, voice shaky. "I didn't know it would go this far." Emeka narrowed his eyes. "Go where?" Muna looked around before sliding a brown envelope across the table. Inside were signed agreements, proof that Yuzo had been using Obinna Jr.'s name to move assets from Obinna Holdings into a fake portfolio. He told me the boy would sign anything if it looked glamorous. And he did. Until recently. Emeka's breath hitched. "He's being set up to lose it all, publicly," Muna added. "He'll be blamed for everything if this goes down." Emeka's hands trembled slightly as he processed the implications. If these documents leaked, or worse, if one transaction failed, Obinna Jr. would be held legally responsible. Fraud, embezzlement, insider manipulation. His name would be forever tarnished, possibly even jailed. "Does Chidinma know?" Muna shook his head. "No. And Yuzo's planning a press event next week. He'll announce that Obinna Jr. is launching a youth fund. But the fund is fake. Just another scam in the loop." Emeka's blood boiled. The boy had been lured into a minefield with his eyes closed. "Why are you telling me now?" Muna looked down, ashamed. "Because the last person Yuzo used like this, she ended up in prison. She tried to talk, and he ruined her life. I couldn't live with that on my chest again." Emeka left the meeting in a rush, already dialing Chadinma's number. When she answered, her voice was calm but exhausted. "It's about Obinna," he said. She stiffened. "What now?" And when he told her everything, she didn't cry or scream. She sat in silence for a full minute, then whispered, "He's still my son, no matter how far he's gone." Emeka, who had seen her fight judges, in-laws, and CEOs, now saw a mother preparing for a different kind of battle. A battle not for power or inheritance, but for the soul of her son. "We'll handle it quietly," she said. "No arrests. Not yet. Let me reach him first. Let me remind him what's worth saving." And in that moment, Emeka understood. The war for Obinna Holdings had never truly been about money. It had always been about love. And Chidinma, she was still holding the line. Obinna Jr. sat in Yuzo's luxurious office, surrounded by glass walls and the illusion of power. The room was decorated with tall bookshelves, plaques, and mock awards, all bearing the Obinna name, but none earned through real honor. On the table before him was another stack of papers. "It's time," Yuzo said smoothly, pushing the documents toward him. "You've earned your place as the face of this empire. All you need is to sign these. It formalizes your leadership over Obinna Media Holdings. You'll be above Chidinma, above the board." Obinna Jr. picked up the pen slowly, but something in him hesitated. He had started noticing things, strange gaps in the business models, partnerships that sounded too good to be true, companies with no office addresses. Still, the temptation to outshine his mother and prove himself gnawed at him. He signed, but not all of them. He slipped two and signed into his backpack. Outside the office, photographers awaited him. Obinna Jr., youngest Nigerian executive to launch a national media fund. One shouted. Another reporter added, "How does it feel to finally lead in your father's footsteps?" Obinna smiled, but it was hollow. The words echoed falsely. That night, every blog and gossip site carried his face, declaring him a symbol of youth leadership and independence. Chadinma was conspicuously absent from every mention. Media narratives were now being manipulated under Yuzo's direction. She was being erased, just as he had planned. Yuzo called it brand restructuring. But for Chidinma, watching it unfold, it felt like betrayal unfolding in slow motion. Her son, her legacy, was becoming a stranger crafted by her enemies. Obinna Jr., meanwhile, began receiving new perks, cars, women, travel deals, all orchestrated by Yuzo's connections. He attended private clubs disguised as networking sessions. Behind the scenes, Yuzo used the contracts he signed to silently transfer key shares to dummy accounts. All of this was framed as mentorship, a transition of legacy. But in truth, Yuzo was building a trap designed to collapse with Obinna Jr. at its center. If anything went wrong, If any fraud was exposed, it would be Obinna Jr.'s name on every transaction. And when Obinna once asked, "Why am I not seeing reports from the fund we launched?" Yuzo brushed it off. "It's a trust model. We protect you from the back end. Don't worry about logistics." That phrase clung to his mind. For the first time, Obinna Jr. felt something close to fear, quiet, creeping fear. The party was loud, drenched in blue and red lights, and pulsing with wild energy. Obinna Jr. stood at the center, holding a drink he'd barely tasted. Around him were influencers, businessmen, politicians' sons, and the same people Yuzo had carefully positioned into his orbit. They hailed him like a prince. But their cheers no longer thrilled him. He felt like a puppet, wrapped in gold strings. A girl tried to kiss him for a selfie. A boy passed him something wrapped in foil. Someone whispered, "Take it. It's normal here." Obinna took it, and for a moment it numbed everything. The doubts, the letter, the hesitation. But the relief didn't last. Minutes later, police sirens blared outside. The lights came on. Screams erupted. There was a drug raid. Panic seized the party. People ran in all directions. Obinna Jr. tried to slip out the back, but a police officer grabbed his arm. "You're Obadiah's son, right? Stay right here." His chest heaved as panic turned into shame. He reached for his phone and called Yuzo. It rang out. Again. No answer. Again. Still nothing. The officer took his phone and bag. "You're being taken in for questioning." That's when another voice interrupted, one he hadn't expected to hear. "Let him go. I'll take responsibility." Obinna turned. Chidinma stood at the entrance of the police station, her face calm, her eyes red from crying. "I'm his mother," she said. "He's just a boy who lost his way." The officer hesitated, then nodded. Inside the car, Obinna Jr. sat in silence, soaked in sweat and shame. He expected her to yell, slap him, scold him. But she said nothing. She simply drove. When they reached the house, she handed him a towel and water. "Your father's letter," she said softly, "wasn't meant to guilt you. It was meant to remind you who you are." Obinna broke. He sank to his knees and sobbed like a child. "I messed up, Mama. I let him use me. I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't want to lose everything." She knelt beside him. "You didn't lose everything. Not yet. But if you stay on this path, you'll lose yourself. And I won't be able to reach you then." That night, she didn't sleep. She watched him, her heart aching, her soul torn between forgiveness and fear. Yuzo had almost won. Almost. The next morning, Obinna Jr. sat on the balcony, holding his father's letter again. He had read it once. Now, he read it slowly, word by word. As the sun rose, it cast light across the paper, and the tears that splattered it. "You were born from love that withstood war." That line stuck. He thought about the years his mother had suffered alone, how she hawked oranges, how she was dragged through courtrooms. And all the while, she still fought to keep his name clean, his inheritance intact. And what had he done? Almost handed everything back to the same people who ruined her. He felt sick. His hands shook as he flipped to the last part. Don't trade your crown for a lie. He dressed simply and walked down to the library, where his mother sat journaling. She looked up slowly. He knelt before her and placed the letter on her lap. "I read it," he said. "All of it. I'm sorry, Mama." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak immediately. She placed her hand on his head. "What matters now is what you do next." He nodded. "I want to know everything. About Dad. About you. About how they tried to take it all. And I want to fix it. Whatever it takes." She handed him Obinna's old business journal, dog-eared, full of scribbles and ideas. "Start here." He wanted you to lead. But not with fists. With wisdom. In that moment, the bond between mother and son was restored, not because the pain vanished, but because they both chose truth over pride. Obinna Jr. realized he didn't need to earn the crown by becoming like Yuzo. He needed to defend it by becoming like his father. He didn't want fame anymore. He wanted clarity. He didn't want to fight his mother anymore. He wanted to fight beside her. And so he made a vow, not just to make amends, but to expose Yuzo and take back every inch of their stolen legacy. "He used me, Mama," he said. "But now I'll use the truth. Let's bring him down together." And in her eyes, Chidinma saw a boy who had finally become a man. The boardroom was filled with murmurs when Obinna Jr. walked in unannounced. The media had been swirling for weeks with headlines about his partying, his failed ventures, and Chadinma's silence. Everyone expected a scandal, but no one expected the boy to stand in the very room he once stormed out of, now calm, composed, and holding a thick folder. Yuzo sat at the head, already smiling, already prepared to manipulate the moment, as he had always done. But when Obinna Jr. greeted the room with a steady voice and introduced himself as Obinna Jr., son of Obinna and Chidinma, the room paused. "Before this company becomes a hollow echo of its past," he said, "I want to tell you how I almost destroyed it." The board members exchanged looks, unsure whether this was confession, madness, or something far more calculated. Obinna Jr. opened the folder and began laying out documents, bank statements, shell company registrations, internal emails forwarded from whistleblowers. He revealed how Yuzo had been using fake companies to transfer money under his name, using his access and blind signature to approve fake partnerships. He showed how media houses were paid to erase Chadinma's name and make him the new face. "I thought I was becoming a man," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "But I was being turned into a weapon. One that would have hurt the only person who ever truly protected this legacy, my mother." The air grew heavier with every page, every screenshot, every email. Chidinma sat in the corner silently, her arms crossed, but her eyes glistening. She hadn't known the extent of her son's courage until that moment. Yuzo's face began to shift from confident to cornered. He laughed nervously. "This is emotional manipulation. The boy is confused. You're all being deceived by a sentimental widow and a dramatic teenager." But Obinna Jr. wasn't finished. "This is the CCTV footage of the night you sent men to our safe house," he added, playing the video from a flash drive. Gasps filled the room. Yuzo stood up to leave, but two uniformed officers walked in. Emeka, standing at the door, nodded. "We've filed criminal charges, fraud, attempted murder, and corporate sabotage." Mama Abadike, seated nearby, fainted as Yuzo was handcuffed. The board, once divided, stood and applauded, not for Obinna Jr., not even for Chidinma, but for the truth, for justice, for the legacy that finally spoke for itself. That evening, Chidinma sat alone in the family library, the very space where Obinna had once shared his dreams. She was staring at the old blue journal, now well-worn and bookmarked with love and pain. When Obinna Jr. entered, he didn't say a word at first. He just walked over and knelt beside her chair. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he whispered, "but I'm not running from who I was anymore." She looked down at him and placed her palm gently on his cheek. "You never had to be perfect," she replied, her voice as soft as it was strong. "You just had to remember who you are. And you did." She handed him the journal and patted the empty seat beside her. They sat there together, flipping through the journal. Chadinma read aloud parts Obinna had scribbled, how proud he was of her, how grateful he was for her business ideas, how terrified he had been of dying before his child was born. "He wanted to be there to teach you all this," she said, pausing to wipe a tear. "But life robbed us. Now I must finish what he started." Obinna Jr. listened, humbled by the quiet weight of a love they'd built over suffering. "I want to rebuild with you," he said, "not just fix what Yuzo broke, but grow it into something bigger than money." She nodded, then stood up and walked to the wall safe. Inside was a folder labeled, Abadike Next, Phase 2. It was her personal expansion plan, one she had locked away, waiting for the day her son would return not just in name, but in heart. They stayed up all night, going through documents, strategies, vision boards. Chidinma explained market shifts, their competitive edge, and how she wanted the company to start investing in the rural economy to create long-term jobs. Obinna Jr. proposed a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, using his mistake as a case study for growth. "We don't just inherit crowns," he said, looking into her eyes. "We polish them. And I want to shine yours so brightly that no one can ever doubt again why it was placed on your head." She smiled, and for the first time in years, not out of survival, but out of joy. 3 months later, the transformation began to show. Chidinma and Obinna Jr. walked into the first board meeting side by side, co-chairs. The room no longer whispered behind her back. They stood when she entered. The same board that once watched her be disrespected now hung on her words. Obinna Jr. spoke only when necessary, giving her the spotlight. "This is not just about business," Chadinma said in her opening statement. "This is about dignity, about earning trust, and proving that the scars we hide can also become our strength." The company began restructuring, this time from the inside out. Ghost apartments funded by Yuzo were shut down. Stolen assets were recovered. Chidinma brought in single mothers, widows, and young talents from underprivileged areas to join her workforce, offering paid apprenticeships and leadership training. Obinna Jr., meanwhile, started a youth-led startup incubator called Legacy Sparks, backed by Abadike Holdings. He toured universities, giving talks about generational wealth, corruption, and redemption. "Don't inherit blindly," he told students. "Question everything, even your mentors, even your ego." Young people who once mocked his name began following him for the right reasons. News outlets now ran headlines like "Obinna Jr. turned scandal into legacy" and "Chidinma Abadike, the silent queen who rebuilt a kingdom." Their story was no longer whispered in pity, but studied as a model of healing through accountability and leadership. At home, things were quieter. They planted a tree in Obinna's honor in the backyard, a symbol of resilience. Every week, Chadinma and her son sat under it, reviewing progress, sharing concerns, and dreaming bigger. "This throne," Obinna Jr. once said, touching the engraved stone at its base, "wasn't just left to me. It was fought for by you." She squeezed his hand. "And now it belongs to us both." They didn't just survive the war, they turned it into something stronger than inheritance. They turned it into a legacy built not on gold, but on truth, blood, and a crown no one could steal again. The sun was high and scorching the day Obinna Jr. walked through the compound of the Abadike ancestral home, now run down and quiet. The gate creaked open as he stepped in, no entourage, no cameras, just a boy reclaiming the last piece of peace from the ruins of betrayal. Inside, Mama Abadike sat on the veranda, her frame thinner, her face tired from years of pride and bitterness. When she saw him, she struggled to her feet and burst into tears. "My son, forgive me, please," she cried, clutching her wrapper like a drowning woman grasping for air. Obinna Jr. remained still, his heart pounding, not from hatred, but the heavy weight of what she once tried to take from him. "You said I would be nothing without your guidance," he replied softly. "But I became something in spite of it." She fell to her knees, holding onto his trousers. "We didn't know what your mother was worth. I let jealousy eat me alive. I let Yuzo twist your mind. I lost both my sons because I couldn't see the woman who kept this family alive." Obinna Jr. knelt gently and helped her up. "You fed me lies," he whispered, "and you tried to erase the one woman who gave me every reason to breathe." She wept louder, but there was no rage in his voice, only the calm of a storm that had passed. "I won't return your hate," he continued, "because I'm my mother's son. And she taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's strength, but it doesn't mean trust." He turned away gently, leaving her with her sobs and her silence, a woman who finally understood that she had broken something too precious to ever get back. As he stepped into the car, Chadinma watched from afar. She hadn't followed him in, not because she feared confrontation, but because she wanted him to decide what peace looked like for himself. When he sat beside her, she simply asked, "Did you say what you needed to say?" He nodded. "And I left behind what needed to stay." She touched his hand. "Then let's go. You have a kingdom to lead, and I have a throne to step away from." He smiled faintly, knowing this wasn't her retirement. It was her graduation. From widow to warrior to woman of legacy. 1 year later, the Abadike headquarters unveiled a new marble statue in the entrance hall. It wasn't of Obinna Sr., though his portrait hung proudly in the gallery. It was of Chidinma, her chin raised slightly, hands folded, standing behind a younger Obinna Jr. in the sculpture's design. The plaque read, "She wore the crown when no one believed she could. Now, she passes it to the son she never gave up on." Across Nigeria, business publications named her matriarch of modern leadership, and universities began requesting to study the Obadike legacy under her stewardship as a case study in leadership, betrayal, and resilience. At a televised press conference, Obinna Jr., now 21, took the stage with poise beyond his years. Dressed in a tailored navy suit with a lapel pin shaped like the initials O, he didn't open with numbers or projections. He opened with truth. "This company isn't built on money," he began. "It was built on the silence of a woman they mocked, the endurance of a mother they discarded, and the vision of a man who saw the future in her. Today, I wear the crown not because I deserve it, but because I was raised by the only person strong enough to carry it alone." Cameras flashed, but for the first time, no headline could twist his words. Chidinma watched from the balcony, her eyes brimming, not with sadness, but fulfilled peace. After the conference, he met her behind the stage. She wore a deep green gown, her signature color of growth. "You did it," she said. "No," he replied. "We did it. But now the world knows who really saved this empire." He opened his palm and placed something into hers. It was a small key. "To the memorial foundation we've set up in Dad's name," he said. "You'll chair it. I want your legacy to guide not just this company, but every broken widow, every underestimated woman, every child raised by strength." She squeezed his hand tightly. In the final moment, mother and son walked side by side, not out of shadow, but into the very light that once tried to burn them down. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.